Welcome back to Power and Politics and the Power Panel. Tina House, Supriya Dwivedi, Ian Capstick and Rick Anderson are all here. And we're going to turn to this interesting question of the President, Donald Trump, banning transgender people from serving in the military. He announced it this morning on Twitter. No answers from the White House on how that's going to unfold, what's going to happen to people who are already transgendered in the military, thousands of them. Can Trump really put the genie back in the bottle? Apparently, Canadian Forces, Canadian Department of National Defence doesn't think so. They just tweeted, "We welcome Canadians of all sexual orientations and gender identities. Join us." And there's a nice picture of a happy military band with rainbow flags in their trumpets. So what a difference. Rick, you're in Washington, so you explain this to us. Do you think that Trump really can, I don't know, turn back the clock, get the genie back in the bottle?
The thing about, no, I don't, Terry. The thing about President Trump is that he doesn't actually have to succeed in most of his policy initiatives. He just needs to launch them. You know, that's good enough, apparently, for his base in many cases, who stick with him pretty loyally through what is one of the most chaotic, probably the most chaotic administration, certainly in living memory and maybe in history. I don't want to quote history. He yesterday referred to himself as the most presidential president other than Abraham Lincoln in American history, which is a big claim. So no, I don't think, you know, this policy will be there as long as, I guess, he's there, unless he changes his mind, which happens frequently. But I don't think it's going to stick.
And Ian, there's no answer on what they're going to do with those who are transgendered already in the military. I mean, it sounds completely, if they don't even have a policy, is it just like politics for the next election, so that Democrats have to campaign in favor of transgender rights or something like that? Is that what the game they're playing?
No, what Donald Trump is doing is what Donald Trump always does, which is that he wakes up far too early or stays up far too late and inadvisably has access to his Twitter account, which he shouldn't. And he tries to distract, and he tries to throw as many red herrings or trial balloons out there as possible. You know, here are the facts of the matter. The President of the United States of America can't just do that. It's not, he's not allowed, and Orrin Hatch, Senator Orrin Hatch, says so. I never thought I'd be on this program agreeing with Senator Orrin Hatch, a Republican of all people.
Yeah, we're going to keep this tape.
Exactly.
Or John McCain or Joni Ernst or a whole bunch of other Republican senators.
Absolutely, because we all recognize, I think, in any Western democracy that the combat arms especially needs to be opened up to all people, and we don't need to be going backwards by suggesting that some people should be excluded from any armed forces, let alone the combat arms. In my estimation, you know, there's absolutely no job within any Canadian armed forces or any other armed forces around the world that a transgender person cannot do. And let's not forget that this is also not incredibly medically expensive in the vast majority of these particular people's lives. You know, what I think a lot of misconceptions happen around transgender issues, where people believe that ultimately it must end in some very, very expensive surgery, which of course is one option, but so is expressing one's gender in a non-binary way, deciding that you want to express yourself in perhaps a feminine one day and a presence one day and a masculine presence and another day is a totally acceptable means of expressing yourself. And I think that what we need to do as a society is be obviously embracing these things. But you know what I was excited about today, Terry, was that when Donald Trump did all of this, all of these people were united in saying, you can't do this. What are you doing? So, you know, at least through his inappropriateness, there has been a little bit of love shown to people, transgender people, who have been historically one of the most marginalized and one of the most targeted of violence still in Canadian society today.
Supriya, can you make any sense of what the president is doing?
Look, I mean, I agree with Ian in that I don't think there's a lot of rhyme or reason to what the president's Twitter feed is, but I think ultimately, and they did have a White House aide confirm this to a journalist at Axios, that they do think this is going to be a bit of a wedge issue come midterms in 2018, and they would like to have Democrats out there campaigning on this. But ultimately, I do agree that having a bunch of Republicans come out and speak out against this is somewhat, I don't want to say heartwarming, because I don't want to go that far, but it's a nice change of pace, I suppose, but I will temper my reaction until I actually see them take some sort of forceful measures against this, because I think ultimately, and you hit the nail on the head earlier, is that if we're talking about what this actually means, estimates show that there are about 15,000 serving currently in the military, either in the reserves or currently deployed, and you can't just willy-nilly, pull them out. And then the other thing is when we're talking about costs, which is what Trump is apparently citing in all of this, costs and some sort of disruption. The costs are already out there, and they've been estimated that the military spends literally 10 times as much of the money on erectile dysfunction pills than it does on anything involving transgendered health. So I have no idea where he's getting these stats from, or if he even has any stats, and he just literally woke up one day and was like, this is what I'm going to do.
Mm-hmm. Tina, what do you think about this? Maybe we're trying to make sense of it, and we're barking up the wrong tree. There is no sense in it.
There really isn't a lot of sense to it. I've never heard of somebody's sexual orientation being the definitive factor if they can serve their country or not. I mean, these people are obviously very brave and very giving in the fact that they are serving their country and certainly doing a great job so far. So, I mean, Trump just wakes up one day and decides he wants to pick a new enemy, and I guess today it's transgendered people. So it makes zero sense to me at all.
For the record, I saw one story adding up the numbers, and Supriya's point was correct, and I think others have made this point that apparently about 2.5 to 8 million a year is the estimated cost of having transgendered people in the military versus more than 40 million a year on Viagra.
This is just the last chapter in a series of similar discussions that have gone on over the last two decades now about the role of women in the military, then the role of gays in the military, now transgender people. And each time it's the same arguments against, and each time they end up, falling apart.
And each time we have to confront this question too, Rick. What about joint operations with allies who have different policies, including Canada?
Yeah, and many of America's allies around the world. Israel has an open policy on this. Not an open policy. Everybody has, including the American military, a requirement that you be medically fit to serve in the military, not surprisingly. And that, that's there. That was there yesterday. And these are folks who passed that test. And, as Senator John McCain said this morning, that's the test that should be applied and nothing else.
Yeah, and go ahead, Ian.
I think of incredible LGBT advocates like Michelle Douglas, for instance, who in the mid-1980s challenged Canadian Administrative Order 1920, which kicked out so many lesbians and gays from the Canadian military. I think about these women and men today because those are the people who I lift up. I mean, I would have never thought 2 or 3 years ago that each and every one of us on this panel properly used the word transgender. I would have never thought 2 or 3 years ago that on this panel I would have had unanimous agreement from all Canadian political parties and all different spectrums of people, like Orrin Hatch, Senator McCain, and others, to say transgender people are capable of serving in the military. We've come a very long way. So Donald Trump, it doesn't warm my heart, like Supriya said. It most certainly doesn't, but it does give me hope. It gives me an incredible amount of hope that within the next 2 or 3 years, transgender people won't be murdered at a rate that is significantly higher than the rest of the Canadian population.
Okay,
We're almost there.
Guys,
we're almost there.